Hello everyone, this is Elric and I wanted to go over some of the questions and answers from the Talkative Try interview with Jonathan Rogers of GGG. Basically, I wanted to give like a small overview and summary of the interview itself. I would highly recommend that everyone watching this watch the interview if you have the time. I understand that some people don't. That's why I'm making this video. But yeah, if you have the time, go watch it. It was an amazing interview. Talkative Try did an amazing job, and I'm just trying to summarize it for the people who may not see the other videos on this. I know some other content creators do this too. I'm just dabbling in it. I understand. Anyway, this is my takes on everything. I'll try and explain it as well as I can. Follow along if you like, and I will leave a link to the interview itself in the description below. Anyway, first question was, what are the vibes? What are the vibes at GGG? Jonathan basically just said they're good right now, actually. They're way better than they have been now that PoE 1 is getting its update, and that's something they prioritized. He said that the artists and sound designers and stuff like that don't really ever feel that bad because everyone always just kind of praises their work, but it's the core people, the core 5 or 6 people, he said, that tend to get the brunt of the negative backlash when it comes to feedback from the community. So he said that right now the vibes are great. Everybody feels good, and he feels like they're really on track to start updates for PoE and PoE 2 to get that ball rolling the way they've always wanted to. They said that a 4-month cycle should be doable now. I mean, it's early days, so he's not entirely sure, but he said that they switched the way they do the philosophy behind how they're updating. Before they were locking in features and not the date, meaning like they said the Huntress had to be in. It didn't matter what date it was, but it had to be in. The Huntress had to be in. Now they've changed that to where it's the date that's locked in, not the features. So they know the day roughly when they want the patch to be out, but and they have a list of features they want to add, but if not all the features get in, they will just push the features they couldn't get in to the next update. And they said that that's how the game used to operate, and that's how they're getting back to it. They didn't really elaborate on why it got away from that, but they've learned that this is just the better way of doing things, and that's good. I'm very glad. It's awesome for us to have like a solid 4-month timeline for both PoE 1 and PoE 2 to be getting their updates. They talked about the overall player numbers across all platforms for both this patch and the first patch that came out. The first patch, Jonathan said it hit around 890,000 people, and the second patch hit around 485k. He said that he expected around 500k for the second patch, so he was happy with the numbers. And this is all without China, he said. And now I don't think that China wouldn't operate on the same server, so that doesn't really matter, but it would overall increase the overall player numbers for PoE 2 in general. And he said that China doesn't even have PoE 2 yet, but it will be coming out relatively soon, he said. Not really something we ever care too much about, but still, that's cool to know that they hit these numbers without even having China as a thing. So it's kind of cool to know that. They've been releasing numbers around certain what things killed players the most, what builds are being used the most in game. That kind of data, something they've been pushing, and Try asked if they had other data that they hadn't released yet that was interesting and that they were using for interesting stuff. And they said that he was genuinely shocked about how many people were dying to the volatile plants. and that they have a great data person now that they've hired that plays both PoE 1 and PoE 2 and knows the game quite well. He says he's really awesome and amazing, and they'll be using more data in the future to help adjust things, and basically that was the gist of it. They weren't really a data-driven company, and they were scared that if they did become that and not like just play the game and feel it out, that things could get misconstrued and changed that didn't need to get changed. But now that they've found a data person that knows the game and plays the game, they're not as scared about that. They still will keep a handle on it, but yeah, they've got a good data person now to help them figure out the things that game feel alone can't get to, you know. Mid-league balance changes. They are not ever going to do mid-league nerfs. They just said that it just doesn't feel good, even with all the respecs in the world. It just doesn't feel good to get they said, the chair knocked out from under you. If you're playing a build and it gets nerfed mid-league, it just never feels good. So they're never going to nerf. But buffs, on the other hand, are fine. They said they actually are planning on doing buffs for as early as 0.2.2, which is amazing, and even more buffs on the way, with 0.3 balance changes being a massive focus in the game. Getting more skills to be more viable across the board is something that they are looking into. And then there is a philosophy change, and they said that, not necessarily a philosophy change, but they did say that they had lost sight of something that in PoE 1 wasn't something they really had to deal with, which was the fact that in PoE 1, every skill, now I know they've missed the mark in a couple, but they said that every skill was looked at as if it could be the end-game skill, because in PoE 1, only one skill is used on the end-game character generally, as like your main skill. Whereas in PoE 2, they thought, well, that's not really a thing anymore because you can use combos. Well, now Jonathan's saying in this interview, well, that kind of made us lose focus on the scaling of how skills should be played and how strong they should be, because they figured that the combo nature of the game would help allow skills to be scaled even if they weren't necessarily the focus of the build. But they said that they're changing that, and that they are going to be buffing skills to make it to where every skill can be used as its main skill, going back to more of a PoE 1 logic for that, which is awesome. They said that scaling for certain skills, they gave a couple specific examples. They are open to adding more ways of scaling, more tags on certain things, stuff like that, to make skills have better ways of being scaled. They gave an example of one of the lightning skills that the only way it could be scaled was through minion damage, and he said that he's absolutely, for that specific case, going to add more tags or something. But that is something, again, that they were actively focusing on in 0.3. They have a list of tier 1 priorities that they're getting to in 0.3, and this is one of them, along with movement speed. Weapon changes are a thing. Weapon change speed, is something that they are looking into changing. They know it doesn't feel good right now. They don't know the exact solution of it yet. They've had a couple attempts at making a solution, but right now nothing concrete, and they are actively working on something to fix it, but right now they don't have a actual nailed down solution to the problem. They know it's too slow, they know it actively discourages combo gameplay, and if it becomes good, that it could encourage more ways of getting skills to be kind of multi-weapon, quote unquote, where like if you're using Falling Thunder, technically he said not only could you have like uniques in the game later that could allow you to use Falling Thunder with like a mace and a quarterstaff, but weapon swapping should cover that, he said, if it feels good, but right now it doesn't feel good enough. He said that they miscalculated the time on Atlas, the League Atlas passives, so like the specific leagues like Expedition and specifically Ritual and Breach. He said that they miscalculated the time it would take for people to get those bosses together. massively miscalculated. So they definitely are adjusting that, but also a lot of the mid progression is still missing, like bosses that they have ready to go and model and rig, but not completed, as in like the rest of the VFX and stuff. That stuff isn't in the game yet, and they just need to add more content basically and that kind of stuff. So there is still massive amounts of stuff missing even from the leagues that are in the game right now, and that's why the progression feels really off, especially for getting those like first 2 points and on. It just feels off to get those points because there's just stuff missing. Uh, there were supposed to be plans to add a bunch of magic and normal mobs that feel different from rares due to them having like some kind of special thing that they do, some special move. And he said that they didn't add as many as they thought they did because they just couldn't work on it beyond, or so far they haven't been able to get back to it since basically they've been balancing the pure stats of all the monsters, and they do plan on adding more special moves to the game eventually to make it more interesting to fight each individual thing, and that's why certain mobs can't even be rare at all because they're supposed to have these special moves that they get that allow them to be a threat without being a rare mob, but that just isn't in the game yet, and they plan on adding it. There were plans to have a boss in every zone, and Try asked about that. Basically, they said that yes, there are still plans to eventually have a boss in every zone, but that idea might not happen until after release. They still plan on having over 100 bosses in the game, like the initial trailers were saying and what they promised. They said that they were going to definitely over deliver on that number, but just the fact that the bosses themselves may not be in every single act zone that they initially said was going to happen, just because it just takes a lot of work to get that stuff in, and that's fine. Mobility skills like the spear, just having a lot of mobility, and a lot of people using the spear even if their build doesn't revolve around the spear. They're using the spear as like a mobility addition. He said that if it doesn't make sense to add it to the weapon, then they're not going to add more mobility just for the sake of it. All weapons need mobility in some form or fashion, but the spear should be the most dexterous, most mobility based thing in the game. Kind of like how the quarterstaff is pretty mobile, but not as mobile as the spear, because the spear's like that's its whole thing. It's very fast, very fluid, very movement based, and that's the way they like it. So he also asked, and as like a secondary question, if blink style skills were planned for the other attributes like strength and dex, and he said that the shadow, the dex int class, will probably end up with something akin to blink, but we just don't know yet, and it's still a ways out, so no concrete thing there. Try asked how often should an average player in the end game, be interacting with the crafting systems, and they said that for things like the Recombinator, they plan on for it to be after every expedition encounter. You should be able to mess with it and play with it. Not that everybody will, but they did say that this one's a bit grindy. The Recombinator is a bit grindy, and it's hard to balance around like not just making every item in the game extremely easy to make, but also making it more usable enough to feel worth it. Um, GGG wants a variety of different crafting options in the game that are used at different intervals and different ways throughout the game, and they will be adding that. That's their philosophy, is they want a bunch of different ways to craft. They just don't want it to be super overwhelming for a new player to start with. So that's the balance issue they're going for there. And yeah, anyway, are you happy with socketables and how players solve simple issues? This is kind of an ad lib. A lot of these questions I wrote down are like ad libs of what was actually said in the interview, and I encourage people to watch the interview if you haven't, please. Basically, they said that the basic runes that you get during your game are your like basic solving stuff. So like the attributes and the resistances, that's how you do that. But during the mid to late game, once you start getting gear that will start solving these issues, like your resistances and your attributes by baseline, because the gear you're getting is better, you can adjust your socketables to be the more chase stuff that they're adding in the next patch. In 0.2.1, they're adding chase stuff like +1 doll spell skill gems and movement speed as two examples, and a lot more. But they're saying that those are going to be like your in-game runes that you replace the starter runes with. So they want you to basically move away from using the simple runes that you start off with in your build. And that's like the intention behind the simple runes and the chase runes. They did say something about how chase runes could end up being a problem because you will basically just wait to use them until you know your piece of gear is absolutely perfect, and that Jonathan sees that as an issue, but he's waiting to see how players react to it to really see how to adjust that, how to adjust the drop rates and whatnot. How does Jonathan feel about how attributes are currently handled in PoE 2? He said he basically asked if a strength character should have to worry about getting more strength at all or not. He said in PoE 1 attributes really aren't an issue, and they wanted to change that, which is why it's the way it is in PoE 2. He did say that skill gems probably could come down by 10 to 15%. Well, the percentage was try, but skill gem attributes requirements could definitely come down, but he didn't have any examples in mind of what gear could be lowered, and I imagine they're just going to have to look further into that to get that information to know what to do with it. But they basically want attributes to not be something that's just trivialized. They want it to be something that you have to solve on your character a lot of the time. They don't want it to be annoying, but they do want it to be something that you have to think about every now and again. Movement speed baseline, so not on gear itself, just as a baseline, players feel like movement speed isn't quite enough. Jonathan said that he's unaware of if not unaware. He thinks that PoE 1 and PoE 2 movement speed is the exact same. I feel like that's kind of missing the point. Even if the base movement speeds are the same, this is me talking now. Even if the base movement speeds are the same across both games, PoE 1 has Quicksilver flasks and early access to movement speed that's very easy in terms of like movement speed, mobility skills that PoE 2 does not have. So if PoE 1 is the same movement speed baseline as PoE 2, the problem is that the movement options you have in PoE 1 aren't in PoE 2. So that's the problem. That's why everybody wants the game to be a bit faster, because if they really want to stick to their guns about, movement speed not being faster than the monsters or whatever they said in the Scissorin interview, it's fundamentally imbalanced. If the games have the same exact movement speed, then PoE 1 is faster, just because there's no Quicksilver Flask, there's no stuff like that. So I don't think people want PoE 2 to become PoE 1 overall and that fast, but they do want it to be faster as a baseline. They would be okay with no movement skills and no Quicksilver Flask and stuff like that, as long as the base movement skill or movement speed of PoE 2 was just a bit faster. I think that's what everybody's trying to get at, but they didn't really talk about it that much. That was just my 2 cents on this issue. But they are actively making movement skill a major issue for 0.3, and they are working on compromises that should make everybody happy, they said. What are their plans for the Infinite Atlas map? They said that the towers and the current Atlas mapping has a lot of issues, but they're not ready to scrap it all yet, and they want to try other things. They do know that, basically, he said that since you know that overlapping towers are the best kind of towers, when you have to trudge through towers that aren't overlapping, it feels really bad. The same thing goes with like knowing that there are leagues. Knowing what's happening in a map, like the leagues that hover above the map itself, doesn't feel good because you don't want to have to trudge through other things to get to the things that you do want, and it just feels bad. So he knows that there's a thing, but he has certain plans that he's not ready to announce on how to fix it. But they are definitely trying to play with this idea a bit more. Jonathan himself really likes the idea of an infinite atlas, but understands that there is a lot of issues that they currently have that PoE 1 does not have, that are things they plan on dealing with. They just don't have a concrete answer for it yet, and they're still experimenting. So they just said they're going to be playing around with the idea they currently have and trying to tweak and change certain things about it. But at the end of the day, if the plan just doesn't go through, then nothing is sacred, and they will scrap it if it just doesn't feel good, or if it just makes the game horrible. They will scrap it and make a new one, just like they always do. Okay, and here's like a rapid fire section. Basically, just a bunch of different answers they answered quickly. Races don't affect the way they balance the campaign at all. Obviously, I felt like that was pretty obvious. They said that races are just kind of their own thing. They are adding actively a tutorial, like right now they are, he said, to Act 1 to show newer players how to just apply transmutations and stuff to their gear. They said that was kind of an issue. Try brought up the fact that his dad didn't even know to do that. Once Try showed his dad how to do that, he played for a lot longer. So they're adding a tutorial to do that. They're adding more chase stuff, just like they always say. They're adding more uniques and that are chase and uniques that are meant for the end game every single patch, and even adding some new uniques in the very next patch that's planned to come out. So that's really cool. They can't talk about the rest of the campaign yet. Cruel is just a stopgap and isn't meant to be there forever. They understand that it doesn't feel good, and they feel like once movement speed stuff is addressed, like they plan on addressing later in later patches, and removing Cruel should make the campaign feel a lot better, and they think that the majority of the complaints will stop once they add these fixes they plan on adding for the base game. So they think that the campaign feel is just pretty much a combination of things in the base game not feeling good enough. Once they fix that stuff, campaign should feel a lot better to go through. Lightning skills tend to be a lot easier to scale due to just how lightning tends to be. It's a more AoE style, just damage type in general. How lightning will chain just because it's lightning. That's the behavior it has, so it chains and is a lot easier to scale into the end game due to that fact, especially for mapping. And they need to find solutions for fire and cold to do that too. Or not just that, but just better scale into the end game. They understand that lightning is far ahead of fire and cold, but Jonathan does think that fire and cold aren't necessarily far away from each other. Fire and cold seem to be very close to each other in his eyes, but lightning is much better than them, and they do plan on addressing that. He did say that adding the uniques they are adding to the game should hopefully make this feel better once fire has a bit more options to it, but right now he thinks that there's just not enough options for fire overall to really make it shine, which may or may not be true. I'm sure if a little while down the line fire still feels bad, then they'll buff it or whatever. They'll change the behavior. But for now, they're just going to add more uniques. I think the fire's okay for certain things. Maybe spells in general, maybe not. I don't know. I haven't played many fire spells, but I do know that my main skill, the artillery ballista build, is a fire build, and it feels fine. Like, I didn't necessarily get to everything in the game. I didn't kill Arbiter, but I did get through most of the game. I was able to do T15s and T16s just fine. It was clearing okay. Maybe not the best in the game, but it was fine. Anyway, but that's not to say that it's good. Fire is still bad, and it could definitely get better. They said that conversion is something that definitely needs to be addressed because it's not as good as it was in PoE 1, and they kind of thought it was going to be, which is what leads into the next thing. They're going to be buffing the Acolyte of Chayla because they thought that they had kind of a PoE 1 brain, they said, PoE 1 brain, when it came to certain stats. They thought that they would be, like, conversion would be a much bigger deal than it is in PoE 2, because there are tools that make conversion not really worth it as much. And then they are addressing that in some way. He didn't go into specifics. Um, the Atlas, basically what I was saying earlier, the Infinite Atlas will be scrapped if they don't find a way to make it feel amazing. It's not sacred. Nothing is. He said div carbs are coming soonish, and there's all new art for them in general, which is really cool. And drop chances for the chase uniques are being vastly improved. In fact, they said that they were shocked about, apparently Astromantis was 1 in every 45,000 divines, he said. And that kind of implies that they are vastly improving the drop rate on a lot of those uniques, just because they basically didn't exist in the game, essentially. There was only 12 on the market when he looked, and he said that 600 divines for an Astromantis is actually a steal because of how rare they are. So they are basically mirrors, essentially. So the vast majority of the player base won't ever see one, and yeah, he said he's changing that next patch, I think, actually, or something close to that. Anyway, they're fixing that. There's a couple other things they talked about. Nothing I felt like was super interesting or needed to be added to this list. Um, but overall, it was a great talk, I feel like. It addressed a lot of issues that people are bringing up. They did kind of gloss over certain things. Like, I do feel like they kind of glossed over the mobility issues and the movement speed stuff this time around. He didn't really go too far into it. I understand that they're fixing it, and we just need to wait and see what their fixes are. Hopefully they're good, but they didn't go into it. And a lot of this stuff is stuff that they say they plan on fixing, but isn't in the game yet. So overall, my conclusion is that it was a great interview, but we need to wait and see for 3.0 and the rest of the patches to come out to see where their head is and what direction they're heading in now. It sounds like 3.0 or 0.3.0 will be an amazing patch, hopefully, with a lot of buffs to a lot of things, a lot of changes to things that people are not liking, while it sounds like it's also not changing certain things. Like, if you really can't stand the end game right now, it doesn't sound like they have any big changes in mind yet. Obviously, they said that they can scrap it and will if they can't find a way of making it good, but right now they're just trying to experiment with how to make this current end game work. It may not be exactly the same, but they do. Jonathan really likes the idea of an Infinite Atlas. He just needs to find a way of fixing the problems that it currently has. And that's fine. It's an early access. As long as they're in early access, I don't care if they're doing these massive changes to this end game. It's not great right now. I agree with that. I think everybody agrees with that. And they even agree. It just needs to be fixed. So that's kind of my 2 cents on everything. I appreciate if you stayed this long through the video. Please go look in the description below and watch Talkitive Try's interview with Jonathan. It's amazing. I know you just watched the summary, but there's a lot more little tidbits that you can learn just by hearing them talk to each other. And just know that Jonathan isn't an evil man who's trying to kill his own game. Obviously, he isn't, but there are some that do think that. And I feel like sometimes, and obviously that isn't happening. So anyway, thank you so much for watching this. If you really liked the video, I appreciate it if you would leave a like. Excuse me, my goodness. If you would leave a like and subscribe to the channel, I will be doing this kind of thing later on. Currently kind of dabbling in Project Diablo 2, excuse me. For the time being, I'm getting to the point where I'm kind of getting to the end of it. I'm not really wanting to continue much more on it, but it was fun while it lasted. If you want to see more things like that or like this, where I'm covering updates and interviews, leave a like and comment and say that you like this stuff more. I appreciate everybody for being here. Thanks, and peace out.